I want to continue where I left off with the tips about the elbow, getting the elbow up, and the wrist, warming up the wrist for the serve. I mentioned a method of climbing the fence as a pattern for the backswing in the service motion. It's a little different than what we have learned with the trophy pose, where the racket is a lot lower in the path in the backswing. Many pros on the tour seem to be using this, and I've had a lot more success introducing it to my students. I'm teaching beginner students up through maybe the USTA 4.0 level. That seems to be my specialty, is adult development. This seems to be very successful, and it remains an advanced technique. So in the last video, we looked at just tossing the ball up and warming up our wrist. The wrist is part of the kinetic chain in the serve. But let's use something that I call loading, or in therapy with my patients when I'm treating them in the hospital, we call it a quick stretch. We're actually stretching the muscle spindles, and then it elicits a muscle contraction so we get a bigger snap. A little teaser, I've got a video that I'll put out looking at using a quick stretch with the shoulder and developing a snap into the swing. That quick stretch is used by Rafa Nadal. If we looked at his swing and analyzed it, you'd see that. Now that's another video, but let me go back to the serve. In the last video, we talked about getting that wrist flexed. Now, that's awfully extreme. Looking at Milos Raonic, you know, he starts off that way. I pointed out in the last video, by doing that, it forces your elbow to stay high. Now, something that I mentioned was climbing the fence. Let's look at that. I'm going to pretend there's a fence behind me here, and I actually take my students against a fence. As the racket is turned so that my wrist is flexed, I bring the racket back. My wrist is flexed, I'm flat against the fence, my wrist is flexed again, but then as it comes over, oh, I'm opening. This is the loading. And as I'm coming through, I'm flexing that wrist again. That's where I'm going to get that big snap. Now, let me bring you over here to the fence. Let's take a look at how that would be if I was teaching this method to any of my students. Turn the camera here a little bit. And what they would be doing as they bring the racket back, the racket is flexed. I'm coming against the fence. You can see how flat my hand is touching the fence, my racket is touching the fence. Now I'm going to roll the racket back. I'm up against the fence, I roll it back. This opens up my wrist. Against the fence, roll it back. Now I'm ready for my snap forward. This loading again, an extension of my wrist, gets the muscle spindles to contract so that as I'm coming forward, I get a nice muscular snap into the ball. Again, it's part of the kinetic chain. I shouldn't be serving just with my wrist. It's my entire arm, from my shoulder, my elbow, my wrist, the whole pattern of that racket coming back. But you do see this in the pros. You see it more often now. As they bring the racket back, they're rotating and it's flat against this surface here. And it has another critical point. For my beginning to use the continental grip for serving. In this pathway, the racket face at this point, if we're serving that way, is already looking in that direction. It's already looking in that direction. As I bring it back against the fence here, my wrist is in a position that I'm already oriented to the contact point. At this point though, the racket turns. That's natural as I'm coming forward into it, and then I open the wrist for the wrist snap. Look where I end up. The racket face is facing into the court. Let's do that again from here. Racket against the fence, back, I'm up, and I serve the ball. I take that swing at it. It keeps the elbow high. We learned that in the last lesson. The wrist flex keeps the elbow high. I have no choice. If not, I tend to bring it down, and maybe I'm never bringing it up high enough. We're talking about those students who are learning how to serve, and even some advanced students that have developed a bad habit. Fence, climbing the fence. That's the whole purpose of learning this new technique, is to have something to use as a reference. My wrist is flexed. I'm against the fence. I'm not pointing that racket back any further. Flexed against the fence. Open my wrist as I roll it back, and I snap forward into the serve. Let's try that. Let's see if that can help you improve using the continental grip, the orientation of the racket, the wrist, the loading, taking those muscle spindles and stretching them a little bit. Don't hurt yourself though. I always tell students, when you're doing something new, you're going to be sore. You're trying too hard to muscle the ball. And it needs to be very fluid. The best serves come without effort. If you're putting any effort into it, you might be changing the technique. And it's surprising, by putting, oftentimes it doesn't serve any harder or faster than a fluid motion. Remember in the last video I talked about a volleyball strike and where the racket is. That should help you with your orientation again when you're warming up the wrist. The elbows out to the side and we come down on the ball when we're practicing. It's that motion there. The toss, let's add that. A little, since we're here against the fence, we use the fence to develop the toss as well. What you want to do is be an arm's distance from the fence. Your left arm, if you're right-handed, is reaching out and you're coming down, and you should be able to toss that ball up against the edge of the fence without it touching the fence, and come straight back down into your hand. You want a consistent toss. If you want, you can try rolling the ball up the fence if that helps. You want that toss to be at least a racket head above the racket at your furthest reach. So if I'm reaching up here, I want that toss to at least be a racket head above. That's not too high for me. I'm a short guy, I'm 5'9". The toss that I've developed, formerly I was a volleyball player, a setter, the toss for me is short. It doesn't matter as long as I'm reaching and I'm making contact at the highest point of my racket when I strike it. We see players using that method. A lower toss prevents the time it's in the sun, prevents the amount of wind that can carry the ball and chasing it, and it also helps with the consistency. It's much easier to toss it low and be consistent than a high toss that maybe you're adjusting where your hand is as you're tossing it up that way. Practice that. If you're chasing your toss around, you're not going to be able to swing correctly because you're constantly chasing the ball. Arm's length from the net or the fence, take that ball, toss that ball up so that it's just barely against the fence there. It's not even touching, it's going up and it's coming down. And go down here a little bit more so you can see me a little bit better. Up and down, up and down. You want that consistency. You should be able to serve with your eyes closed when you're at that point of consistency. The timing, everything else blends together. Recap, just really quick. We want that wrist flexed as we come back to get that elbow high. The racket and the hand are against the fence. It's closed, the wrist is flexed. As we rotate over, the wrist now is open. It's ready, it's loaded, so that as I come forward, there's my snap and I've come through the ball. Give that a try. See if that helps you with your serve. I know that was a lot to talk about. You may have to stop the video and break it down a little bit. Send me questions, send me ideas, anything that you'd like me to talk about and discuss. I look forward to showing you how we're going to look at the eastern and the semi-western and maybe using a little elbow load into our swing. That should be interesting to look at and maybe something that will help you as well. All right, give that a try.